Okay, today we are going to tackle what I think is one of the hottest convo pieces at the moment, and that is crypto. It's all I see, like on TikTok especially. It's like somebody will post a video about crypto, you'll look through the comments, and it'll be, half the audience talking about how you're gonna lose your whole investment, and then you have the other half going, it's gonna reach $150,000 a coin, and it seems like it's one, polarizing, and two, you're either one or the other. You don't find a lot of people in the middle. So what we're gonna do today is basically have a conversation about crypto with two people, one Vance, one Jerry. And one, both are brilliant. Two, hold a lot of similar beliefs in what crypto is, but take a different position on how they are or are not invested in it. Vance has, I think, some of the similar views that some of the younger generation would have, Gen Z or millennial, and currently is invested. Jerry, I don't think you are invested in crypto, correct? Not invested in crypto. And so we're gonna talk about the different viewpoints, and hopefully at the end of this convo, maybe have a different perspective, and hopefully we come back with more than we started. So moving in, we'll start with you, Vance. Can you explain to the audience that maybe isn't familiar with crypto, what crypto is and why people are so excited about it?
Okay, so crypto, and in a nutshell, we're here to talk about cryptocurrency. And when you call something a currency, you're saying it has the fact or quality of being generally accepted or in use. And then the first part of that portmanteau is crypto. Crypto refers to cryptography, and that is the study of sending and receiving encoded messages. So you have person A, and you have person B. Person A wants to send a message to person B without the possibility of person E in the middle either eavesdropping or modifying the message. So the real innovation here is that back in 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto figured out that you could combine cryptographic methods with a design for a deflationary unit of value, and that would solve the digital double spend problem.
Okay, so before I even ask you to clarify what double spend is, basically what you're saying is it's a digital form to send a message without a middleman, essentially?
That would be cryptography, yes.
That would be cryptography.
Yes, so when you combine it with currency, it becomes the sending of a means of exchange or value.
Okay, got it. So then walk us through what double spend is.
So let's say I create a computer program. And in this program, I say everyone in your city gets 100 units of value, right? We'll call them V units. You have 100 V units, you have 100 V units. And you can spend these V units at my Etsy store, right? So I make these homemade necklaces, you can buy them. 25 V units for the cheap one, 100 for the expensive one. So Mikey, you might go, okay, well, I'll buy 4 cheap necklaces, give them out, my V units are gone. Whereas Jerry knows more about computers. And he looks at my source code and he says, I know if I send 4 payments of 25 V units and a 100 payment of V units at the same time, the system's not going to know they're the same unit of value. That's called a double spend.
Okay, so then in this moment, are you able to double spend with cryptos?
No.
No.
As far as we are aware, the only possibility to double spend a crypto would require quantum computing that doesn't exist.
Okay, so we call it cryptocurrencies. And you kind of talked about what makes it a currency. Is it technically a currency? And if not, what needs to happen for it to become one?
Okay, so this is a pretty easy question, and the answer is no. It's not a currency.
Not a currency.
It is not a currency.
Okay.
Not in the sense that it's generally accepted, like gold, and not in the sense that it's in use, like the dollar. It has come a long way in the 10 years since it was created, but in order for cryptocurrency to be a true currency, at least Bitcoin, it would require a number of layer 2 solutions over the top of it, and that's just a function of some of the network constraints. However, I think for Bitcoin to solidify as a store of value, that will just require wider adoption. Now, you'll have some people say that Bitcoin is in this speculative bubble, right? Kind of like the tulip mania of the mid-1600s. The problem with that, and I'm going to burst that bubble a little bit, is that the first Bitcoin bubble actually occurred in 2011 when there was a news article in a popular online magazine about it. And so the price of Bitcoin went from pennies to $1. Pretty big bubble, right? Second bubble for Bitcoin happened in 2011 also, where a subsequent article detailed its use in dark markets. So then the price went from $1 to $29 before eventually settling back to $2. Now, the bubble that most people are familiar with is in 2017 when it went from 1,000 to 20,000 and settled around 3,000. And I think that is a cycle we'll continue to see, and I'm not aware of any other mania-type bubbles that have been cyclical in nature.
So then I'll ask you, Jerry, what is the cause in the bubbles happening at what seems to me as being pretty frequent? Or is that just common in other, I don't even know what to call it, other currency? What do you even compare this to?
Yeah, you don't really have a good comparison available. To Vance's point, you don't have, at least not that I'm aware of, examples of other markets where you have these bubbles that, blow up and then explode and blow up again and explode again, and the same thing. They tend to move from thing to thing. But I would say that while I agree with him in terms of that detail, I would say that doesn't mean it's not a bubble. The whole concept of a bubble is when valuation detaches from any kind of fundamentals. So whether you call it speculative pricing or a bubble, you're basically saying the same thing. And to see the price rise so dramatically, and then crash back down is, I think, a good indication that it was a bubble, and probably is again.
So in this, I guess in this case, what are you even tying a value to?
That's the problem.
We don't know.
Yeah, there's not at least.
So like in the comments, right? You have, you're starting to see like big hedge fund managers talk about it too. Somebody will claim that Bitcoin's, each coin's going to make it to $100,000 a coin. You kind of mentioned it earlier. I think that it may get to $100,000 a coin, and then we're going to see it drop, and it's going to settle, etc. What is the reasoning behind that? Where does the speculation come to say, yeah, it's going to reach 100K?
So I think where we stand now, when I see price predictions like, oh, Bitcoin's going to hit 100K, to me it's a bit of numerology. So at 100K, Bitcoin would have a market cap of about $1.8 trillion, which also happens to be about 18% of the global gold market, right? So that's kind of an interesting way to look at those numbers. Alternatively, you could look at total US household wealth. And if you assume 1 to 5% allocation to this asset class over the next couple of years, well, that gets you within pitching distance of that 100K number on either side.
I'd add that's using the comparison to the gold market. That's part of the value proposition of Bitcoin. Is basically a gold substitute. So it's not a totally unreasonable thing to view it in that context and say, well, okay, if Bitcoin actually achieves that goal of becoming a recognized substitute for holding gold, then it captures some of that market share, and so some of the value that is currently allocated there gets allocated over here. So not totally unreasonable to look at it from that perspective. There's just no reason why it has to happen that way. And so, when we talk about speculation, or call it speculative, it's because it's based on an assumption that something's going to happen that is not necessarily a safe assumption.
So then, okay. And so do you have any idea what the percentage of people that are looking at Bitcoin as a wealth preserver or, a way to hedge against inflation or store value versus the amount of people that are looking at it as a wealth generator? You see these huge swings and I can, make money on the way up, etc. And I guess part of the speculation is what would need to happen for it to start looking more like gold and using it as the store of value that you were referring to?
I'd say the number one thing that needs to happen is you need to start seeing markets trading in that currency, some sort of a market. You have a market that is, Bitcoin itself has a market. You can trade it for other currencies. But one of the things that, when we look at, say, the dollar, for example, sort of the main reserve currency of the world, it didn't get that status just by some random chance. You have, the oil market that was really responsible for that. I don't know if you know about all of that, but basically going back to the Nixon administration, you had a treaty that the United States entered into with most of the oil producing nations that said, we'll provide you defense, you trade only in dollars. That treaty still is basically in the same form today. In fact, 2 years ago, there was a big threat when President Trump was proposing to make OPEC subject to U.S. antitrust laws. And Saudi Arabia threatened, okay, then we're going to stop trading in dollars. We're going to let oil trade in other currencies. And U.S. backed off of that threat real fast. So, the status of the dollar as a reserve currency is a function of some resource that everyone in the world needs that they can only obtain in dollars. There's nothing like that with crypto, or any of the cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin. Having said that, while that's an argument against crypto as a reserve currency, it's also an argument for it. From a U.S.-based perspective, we're very content to have that status. The rest of the world, not so much. So, they all have a vested interest in, finding an alternative to the dollar, so that the U.S. doesn't have so much control over the global economy. So, whether it's Bitcoin or something else, of course, they want to see something succeed in that capacity. Will Bitcoin be it? Maybe, just too early to know.
So last week, Vance brought up this idea that a lot of tech platforms are being valued based on their scale of the network effect, and has nothing to really do with revenue, and that Bitcoin could be following that same suit. So I guess we'll start with Jerry. Can you explain what the network effect is, and then how you would even monetize that? And I guess you could follow with how they can or can't monetize it.
Okay. So the network effect is basically talking about how the more widely something is adopted, the more valuable it is. So some examples of that, PayPal. What's the value of an online, an ability to process transactions online? Well, if one person uses it, it's not worth very much. But when everybody uses it, well, now, Venmo, another example, we can send money back and forth. We can send, buy things from vendors using it. It starts to, the more adoption it gains, the more it's worth. Same thing can be applied to social media companies, Facebook, Instagram, etc. The more widely adopted it is, the more useful it becomes from a user standpoint, and the more capacity there is to monetize the attention that it garners. I'm not sure the same argument applies necessarily to the valuation of a Bitcoin, but it definitely applies to the utility of Bitcoin. From a utility, economists use that word to talk about how useful a thing is. So, as people use Bitcoin more and it becomes an accepted media of exchange, if that happens, then it becomes more useful to anyone who has it.
Vance?
I dig that. All right, so this is going to be a little bit of a winding path here. There's this guy, Lukman Adekunle Salami, or L.A. Salami, who many consider to be the Bob Dylan of our generation. And he's got this song called The Talisman on the Age of Glass. And it starts, the stars lose meaning, futures condense to past. yet I want for nothing in the age of glass. And then it ends, all wealth comes cheaply on how we choose to last, for there are no riches in the age of glass. And to me, it's just this beautiful depiction of how we're living our lives through the glass in our pocket, and the glass on our desk, and the glass in our living room. If you want to see a familiar face, what do? You look through the glass. You need toys for your pets, a date for Friday night, a doctor's appointment, and you just reach through that glass. But despite all of the abundance we have in a first world country, we're always just waiting for that next want. And the thing is, right now, all of our wants are coming through a single point of contact. Companies like Amazon, Facebook, Uber, Google, Venmo, keep going down the list. All of them, they haven't just monetized their networks. They've actually weaponized their networks in order to coercively extract value from our time and attention, which in the end is the only thing we have. So the argument for Bitcoin is not that there will someday be a way to monetize the network. The argument for Bitcoin is that it is a durable network and that it has a coin that is divisible, verifiable, scarce, and allows for trustless transactions. So the reason to buy Bitcoin is because as adoption increases, the value is likely to increase. But the reason for Bitcoin is not to increase in value. So if we look at Everett Rogers' theory of the innovation adoption curve, where innovators make up the first 2.5% of end users, and the next 13.5% of end users are called early adopters, we're still in very early stages of this technology. I think Bitcoin adoption in the US is estimated to be at around 5%. Now, obviously, nobody knows what the future holds. Bitcoin is a new technology and therefore speculative and subject to a new technology coming out that actually is better or improves upon it. But if you look at Everett Rogers' model, the window of opportunity for profit in this new technology will exist at least until we get to the 50% adoption rate. And that has been seen through every new tech, 4G, the phone, the internet, social media. It's pretty constant.
So how similar is this moment to like the dotcom moment, where it seemed like everybody was chasing this new thing and everybody was kind of speculating on who was going to make it out the winner? Is that what's going to happen here? You're going to have some companies that make it, some that don't?
This has been a real stumper for me, and I think the difference is that in the 90s, we had the internet, and we had all these companies jumping on the internet and these massive valuations, and then you had all the losers die off and the winners took the gains. Whereas cryptography has been around as long as the internet, maybe even for sure longer. I mean, we used Navajo code talkers in World War II because it was a code that couldn't be broken. So the technology isn't necessarily new. It's the combination of a currency with the technology is new. And I think that unless there is a fatal flaw to Bitcoin, it actually has a governance structure that will allow it to slowly adapt to the changing needs of society over time.
Huh. You know what's so fascinating is just what you were saying prior, which is different than how I originally looked at crypto. Like how I was looking at crypto was like actually the government's way to take more control. It was like, holy crap, this is like the beginning of the end in a sense. But kind of what you're saying and why a lot of people like Bitcoin is it's actually a hedge against that control, where it's a way for people to actually own the money or whatever this currency or crypto turns into. That's separated from the tech oligarchy or the ultimate control that this site has. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I guess this question is going to go over to Jerry. We all agree that it's a speculation, right? At what point do you start speculating? Or when is the point where you feel comfortable not only for you to invest, but where you would start looking at this as an investment for clients?
Yeah, good question.
Because there's an argument that we do speculate at times with real estate, right? There's some times where we can be more speculative than
You
others.
make assumptions.
Yeah.
You always make assumptions about the future anytime you're investing. And so in that context, yes, that anytime you're looking into the future and trying to predict, you're speculating to some degree. There's a difference though in, for example, when we're talking about multifamily and we speculate that we think rents 5 years from now will be greater than rents are today. That's not a far stretch. When we're looking at household formation, people need a place to live. And so unless there's a big change in behavior of, okay, we don't, as a society, we no longer value living independently. We now all want to live together in one apartment. If that were to happen, then okay, that could turn that assumption on its head. I don't think that's going to happen. I think people still value living independently. They still want to have their own apartment or home, and so new household formation is fairly predictable as long as that holds true. And we know we're undersupplied if that household formation happens as expected, and so that's what drives rents higher. And one thing I didn't mention is new supply. Right now, rents aren't high enough to justify new construction in most cases, unless you're building, in your major MSAs at the highest possible rents. So, that lower and middle market entry level type of housing is very significantly undersupplied. So, that type of speculation, yes, we're still looking into the future. Yes, we're still speculating, but
Variance of which we speculate is a totally different thing than what we're talking about.
well, let's just say I have more confidence in those predictions than I can in something like Bitcoin at this stage. So, that's not to say that those things that people are speculating about can't happen. I'm not one that's predicting that Bitcoin is going to go away. It could end up being replaced, as Vance mentioned, by something better. There are many developers out there trying to build something better. China, as a nation is, Facebook is working with large banks here in the U.S. to try and build something. So cryptocurrency as a concept, I don't think is going away. Will Bitcoin be the beneficiary of that or not? Who knows? It does have first mover advantage, and it has adoption already. So that's significant. But how much value does that create? How much should we imply in value on that? I really don't have a model for that.
So then what has to change for you to go, yeah, okay, it's time to consider it?
I don't think it will.
That's what you're saying. Okay, that's fair.
Well, and for the same reasons that, we've had conversations about gold in the past, and all the same logic applies. I don't buy gold as an investment. We might call it savings. We might call it speculative hold if I think the price is going to move. We might call it a store of value, but it's not an investment. In my mind, an investment is something productive. So if I invest in a piece of property, it's providing something to a customer, to a tenant. It's providing a necessity. It's housing. If I invest in a new company, it's going to generate, or it's going to manufacture some widget that people need. The investment is in developing something that produces something that's needed. Gold, Bitcoin, in my mind, don't do that. Any more than any other currency does. So, if I'm looking at a currency transaction, if I, think maybe euros are going to be worth more than dollars next year, I don't just go buy euros. I go buy an investment denominated in euros. So whether that's a government bond, whether it's a stock, something like that. So, I don't expect I'll ever buy a cryptocurrency just for the sake of holding a cryptocurrency. If at some stage I can buy it, actually make an investment denominated in that currency, maybe. But I don't expect I'll ever just hold Bitcoin or anything else just as standalone, unless I can earn interest on it.
Got it. Vance, you want to add on that?
Well, do you hold gold?
Well, yes. That's going to come as a shock. I will say I inherited some gold from an uncle many years ago. It's a very small amount, and it has sentimental value, so I still own it. But no, I've never bought gold.
And you don't believe that gold belongs in anyone's portfolio?
No, not saying that. There's a philosophy that people, a lot of investment managers will look at gold as a diversifier, and so they recognize, okay, it's got volatility in its pricing, but that volatility, the price doesn't tend to move with other types of assets, and so it can, while it's risky in and of itself in a portfolio context, it can bring the overall risk down a little bit. So there's some merit to that, but I don't see a profit motive for holding it as much as a risk reduction motive.
Interesting. Now, in times of past market volatility and, say, economic crises, what generally happens to the price of gold?
It varies and depends largely on the extent of the crisis. So, the problem with gold is it's not useful as a media of exchange. Okay, so we're not going to be, if the
Not
global
divisible.
financial system totally collapses, which is why a lot of people like to hold gold, it's not really useful in that environment. If you got a big chunk of gold, unless you have a means to process that and reduce it into smaller pieces, you're not going to be going out and buying tonight's dinner with it, right?
But you might, after you've established a village, use it to exchange with your next door neighbor village to get fish or corn or whatever you might need.
Perhaps, ultimately.
This is a little
yeah.
extreme example, but
Very extreme. Yeah, and so there's some value to it. I don't think it's quite as significant as a lot of people make it out to be. And its utility is largely driven, I believe, by the industrial demand for it. I think that provides, it's used in electronics and communications equipment. And
even
things
though
like
about
that.
50%
Satellites.
of its use is in jewelry, which is purely cosmetic.
Right. But those functions, the cosmetic and the industrial use provide some base to, a valuation for it. We don't have that yet with crypto. Again, ultimately, I think that some cryptocurrency, whether it's government sponsored or independent like Bitcoin, will end up developing that kind of a base, but we're just not there yet.
So let's go 50 years into the future, and every country has a central bank digital currency. What's the world reserve?
Well, I would argue, in effect, we already are at that point. Most of the dollars that transact, there's no physical currency to it. And the same would be true around the world. In fact, India, I think, was one of the first to try and totally eliminate any kind of physical currency, and they wanted to go entirely electronic.
Yeah, but this is what we're talking about is a different type of digital currency, correct? Like as of right now, like I get what you're saying. There's not a lot of physical transaction of dollar, but there's still not the ability to track or tell. For example.
Oh, but they can.
Okay. Then let's talk on that.
In fact, the sort of the audit trail. If you're talking about the Big Brother issue,
yes, that's where I'm
government
going
knows
with this.
Too much.
Yeah.
They know more in your transactions with dollars than they know in crypto.
But do they have the ability to control where it goes? So, for example, like let's say right now I lent you $1,000 and it's tracked the same way it's tracked now, or the government says, all right, Vance, I'm going to give you 1,000 coins. But the government, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, with crypto has the ability to control how that 1,000 is spent, or the fact that they can get their interest from him before a certain amount of that value is basically deployed in different areas. Does any of that make sense?
Not tracking with you.
Okay, so, and I could be wrong here, but basically with cryptos, do they have the ability, like, how could I say it? Do they have the ability to limit where you spend your money? Versus right now, you're saying there's a paper trail on where you spend and they can track how you spend it. But isn't there a new type of control where they say, nope, you don't get to spend there. You can spend here, here, and here. And then they're not only tracking, but telling you where dollars can go.
Okay, so I would say they already have that in the context of what they would be likely to, or they already have that ability,
Okay.
number one. And I think it's already being exercised as much as it is likely to be exercised. So, for example, the reason why India wanted to get rid of physical currency in the first place is to get control of black markets. If you have a means to trade anonymously, that creates opportunities to defy the government's orders. With the U.S. dollar, we have that. You're not allowed to transact with certain foreign nationals. The banking industry, for a long time hasn't been, even though marijuana was legalized in the state of California at the federal level, it was still illegal. And so transacting with a grower of marijuana was actually a money laundering activity. So the banks were prohibited from doing any kind of business with any company that was involved in the marijuana trade. So if you had dollars, physical dollars, you could transact with them, but if you wanted to transact with them electronically, you couldn't. They didn't have a banking resource. Okay. So the government already pretty much has that level of control, and they make use of it. So I don't think the introduction of crypto really makes that any worse. Good.
But if we remove the physical supply of money from circulation, there seems to be a distinction between should not and cannot that will shrink.
I think you're partly right there.
Imagine the marijuana industry in California. If there was no banking, there was no cash, there was no ability to transact. Would it have happened?
Yeah, we're getting out and off on a tangent here, but it's a fun one to try and speculate on. People are amazingly innovative, okay, and trying to eliminate the possibility of black markets. Good luck. So you have even just looking at cryptocurrencies. You have Bitcoin. It starts to get adoption. Of course, what's the first thing that happens? You get copycats that come in and say, well, Bitcoin can be tracked. It's you can transact under a pseudonym, so it makes it hard to track. But they can track it. It's not totally anonymous.
No, it's completely public information.
Exactly, and so the transactions are completely public, and through that data, they can ultimately figure out who you are, in spite of your pseudonym. And so other alternative, currencies sprung up that supposedly address that. So there's no real barriers to entry to a new, cryptocurrency, and anytime, something like that in the black market needs to develop, people will find a way around that.
Is there ever a scenario where there's a technological Armageddon?
Sure.
Meteor, volcano, solar flare, drone attack that gets repelled by necessary EMP explosions, electromagnetic pulse.
Would that take out the whole entire crypto?
In concept, it could happen. Yeah.
So at that point, you don't just take out crypto, you take out all the machines that are keeping track of, how much credit card debt do you have, and
that same problem
who remembers?
Now. Yeah.
What's interesting is, so I always say, if everything goes kaput, you better be long cigarettes and whiskey. Because those can be traded for food and water as long as you're able to maintain your physical safety. Yeah. But eventually, with the knowledge that we have currently in our brains and the people that survive, they'll be different than people 1,000 years ago. They know about computers. It'll be a lot easier to bring these things back. Well, before we reestablish a global interconnectedness you can actually send Bitcoin payments across the Atlantic Ocean on a piece of paper. Handwritten down, someone types them in. Bitcoin is just information. And it can be, you can transmit it through pulses of light. I mean, in any form, you could come up, in fact, there was an artist who designed a puzzle that was a painting. And if you solved the painting, you found the private key to his store of Bitcoin and you got the reward. And so the first person to solve the puzzle got the reward, but you could continue to try to solve the puzzle. There was just no money left in the account. So, you know, basically, if the transaction data is validated by the cryptographic method, it can be done. The other interesting thing is that theoretically, you could restore all of the value held in Bitcoin from a single node out of the tens of thousands of devices that maintain the network. The same cannot be said for the cash in the bank, or credit, or maybe even China's central digital coin.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's why you know, so many in the banking system have taken an interest in blockchain as a technology, you know, just because of that layer of redundancy and you know, the potential, you know, additional security that it might provide. At least in concept, it's supposed to.
I like that. Let's finish on this. For all of the younger kids who are super hyped on crypto, what's one piece of advice you could leave them with?
One piece of advice, you know, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You know, if you know, there's nothing that is inherently wrong, particularly if you have some sort of a utility for it. You know, if there's something that you are buying that you can buy with it, great. You know, but don't mistake it for an investment.
Vance?
Well, like Jerry said, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You know, I have put money into certain cryptocurrencies because I believe in the project. You know, Bitcoin as a censorship-resistant form of payment, I believe in. Ethereum, I'm a little less certain about, although, you know, it's sort of this, like the machines are coming to replace us. Well, Ethereum is the digital version of that, where you no longer need the person in the middle to form the contracts. That'll be an interesting space. I'm not super sold on it yet. There's also the Batcoin, which is basically a move away from advertising as a browser business model, which I firmly believe in. So I'm voting with my dollars, but I'm also not putting more money in than I'm willing to wake up tomorrow and say, oh, it's gone, that's okay. I'm gonna move on with my day.
That's well said. I love that. So first off, thank you guys. I hope all of you not only enjoyed that, but learned a lot. I certainly did. Also, leave comments on this one. Let me know your view on crypto. I think all of us collectively do still agree that it's a speculation. I love your point on, I just believe in it, and I like getting behind things I believe in. I thought that was really cool. Don't put money into it that you are not willing to lose, but nonetheless, tell us your opinion. Thank you guys. We appreciate you, and we'll see you guys on the next video.